Hey, Mike. Welcome to the meeting.
Hello.
You can make it. Oh, no. All right. Welcome to our general membership meeting for December 5th, 2023. We have this is our speaker series. We have every month we invite a speaker to come and talk about a topic on sustainability. Today we have Albie Miles here. We're excited to hear what you have to tell us. We don't have any guests besides Albie. You'll have plenty of time to talk about yourself later. So normally we do a little introduction for our guests. So we're going to go over our birthdays, a November review, talk about our future events coming up. Just a brief mention for our board member nominations, and then we'll give you the floor and finish out with our 4-way test. So we had 2 birthdays this December. Yesterday was Megan Lung. Yeah, I'm gonna send her a text.
I show up and I don't even get to be on the board. This meeting sucks.
Wait. No.
Yeah, sure is. Well, guess not. Doesn't matter apparently.
No. Well, what's the date?
22nd.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it?
You are not on my list.
In the
I don't know how to get in the club runner. Don't ask.
Oh, that's why. Because that's where you're supposed to upload it to.
You can even send me the link. I don't know. Tried to help me.
I sent you the link for the calendar to put in.
Boom.
Oh yeah, I don't know if that was.
Outlook on it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, at least your birthday won't get on your first to the 4th.
You're in there.
Yeah.
It's forever.
Out of order, but it's okay.
No, it's not. Has to be perfect for you. There we go. Hey, thanks for coming. Hey, how's it going? All right. And so we had a couple events last November, or for November. It's very exciting. We passed our 10,000 tree goal, which we've had since 2019. So we planted 100 trees on November 18th, and we had a bunch of people come out. So the 100 trees took about 5 minutes to plant. And then, yeah, we spent the rest of the time talking, mingling with other people. We did a little hike further back in the valley. We haven't been back there before. So, and then we also had the Malama Mauna Lua, where we picked invasive algae. So they took us out wading into this little zone. There was basically a rectangle of area that they had already sampled to see what was there. We picked out all the invasive algae, and it was so muddy we couldn't even see what we were working with. So took off our gloves, like we could feel what type of algae it was with our fingers. But yeah, it was because I've been doing this. I worked with them a little bit in 2018, and there was so much more native algae there than there used to be. So very good sign. Upcoming events, we have our December events. So today we have we had a restoration work day that got canceled on the 2nd. So we were supposed to work with the local AF fish pond. That will be rescheduled probably for January, but we're still working on it. We have this event with Albie Miles on the 15th. We have the EcoRotary and Parlay Christmas party. And on the 30th, we have a seed bomb toss event. This one, you do have to register in advance. We need to fill out the waiver. We need to send it to them 3 weeks in advance. So everybody has to register if you want to go by December 9th. So that's this Saturday. So I'll leave it on the screen for a few seconds if anybody wants to do it now. Are you guys doing this, or should I move?
Oh no, go.
Okay. Okay. Huh? Yep. So we are going to be doing board member nominations for 2024, 2025. Susan is putting together her slate of people that she wants to be the board members. But this is an opportunity for anybody who wants to nominate members to be board members for the next year. Does anybody have any nominations that they want to bring up?
I nominate Janine for youth services.
Okay.
That was your cue.
I know, I'm gonna nominate Becca for foundation. For what?
Mhm.
Her foundation, I'm like, what? Foundation.
You're nominated. Can't help it now.
Didn't we just?
Yeah, then we just vote what she said.
Yeah, so we're going to be putting out a Google form for everybody in the club to vote, but it's just an opportunity for people to put forward their names. All right. And now for the main event. So here we have Albie Miles. Albie Miles is the Associate Professor of Sustainable Community Food Systems at the University of Hawai, Oahu. Dr. Miles received his Ph.D. in Environmental Science, Policy, and Management from UC Berkeley in 2013. His research explores the relationship between farming system biodiversity and ecosystem services, from agriculture and the structural obstacles and opportunities to sustainable food and farming systems. He has worked at UN FAO in Rome, Italy, and the Center for Agroecology and Sustainable Food Systems at UC Santa Cruz, my alma mater. Dr. Miles currently serves on the executive committee member and chairs the research working group of the Interinstitutional Network for Food, Agriculture, and Sustainability. Dr. Miles serves as specialty chief editor of the Frontiers in Sustainable Food Systems section on social movements, institutions, and governance. And for the University of Hawaii system, Dr. Miles chairs the U8 System Basic Needs Committee. Would you like to come up and present?
Sure.
Okay. And you okay? I can just start the slideshow from here.
Oh, sure. I mean, click advance
Yeah, just
anywhere. Okay.
tap
Great.
or use the arrows.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so what, I'm gonna just kind of sit to the side so I can see what I'm doing as well. Great. All right, so what I wanted to do with you folks tonight is just cover some basic concepts in food systems and sustainability. Talk about why food system transformation is critically needed, and then how some of the work that I'm doing here on the ground, both undergraduate, graduate education, and then our annual food system summit that's coming up, how that is designed to affect food system change in Hawaii. So as was mentioned in my little bio, I have a background in production agriculture. For a period of time, I wanted to be an organic farmer. That did not pan out. Then I went into academics. I spent a lot of time studying horticulture and organic farming systems at UC Santa Cruz. And so UC Santa Cruz has the oldest organic farming and gardening training program, and the nation started in 1967. And you can see some images of some of the fields and people working out in those fields. A really beautiful place. But while I was there, one of the things that I was introduced to is not only an understanding of how organic farming systems function ecologically, but there were natural science and social science researchers really exploring this idea of what does food system sustainability really look like? That there needs to be a foundation of biophysical sustainability or ecological sustainability in the production systems. But obviously enough, there's human beings that are involved in the food system, and a lot of them are grossly exploited. A lot of the people who labor in the fields cannot afford the foods that they're actually responsible for producing for those of us who are more fortunate. And so it began this process of thinking through, how do you think about the whole food system, from the production systems themselves all the way through to who are the recipients of the produce that comes out of production agriculture. So after about 10 years at the Center for Agroecology, I enrolled in a PhD program at UC Berkeley. And while we were there, we created what's called the Center for Diversified Farming Systems. And the intention behind this center at UC Berkeley was to revive the ecology of agriculture. That is, the biophysical scientists who are trained as ecologists like I am, looking at how do agricultural systems function ecologically. And when you look at the different types of inputs and whether or not there's crop rotation or cover crop use, how do those systems function ecologically? So we started the Center for Diversified Farming Systems that led eventually into the Berkeley Food Institute. And this is now a major initiative of UC Berkeley. It involves multiple colleges across the campus. And the idea is, how can we draw upon public policy and ecology and public health and nutrition and other disciplines to research what are the foundations of a sustainable food systems and what are the policy recommendations that are necessary to drive systemic change forward toward the realization of health, equity, resilience, and sustainability in the food system. Does that make sense? So I've been involved in these different institutes, including at UC Santa Cruz, that has a history of multidisciplinary problem-based learning. And so that's what I brought to Hawaii when I came here, and we created what's called the Sustainable Community Food Systems Program. And the idea behind this is to train young people to think critically and systemically about the food and agricultural system from a biophysical science perspective, a social science perspective, and even the humanities. And without that, integrate experiential and hands-on learning and send them off into the world really to be agents of change, to realize a more sustainable, equitable food system for Hawaii or wherever they end up. So I've been using this term food system. Let's actually break this down. So when I talk about the food system, I'm not talking about agriculture. Agriculture is a subset of a larger, complex social ecological system that involves everything from the inputs that go into production to the production systems themselves, to the distribution of that food, who has access to it, all the way through to waste disposal, as we were talking about. Those are different aspects of the food system. And as you guys know, as people involved in environmental issues, there's many aspects of the food system that are broken, like the waste management system. It could be better realized were that green waste that we generate be transferred into a composting regime, and then it's actually sold to producers to enhance soil quality and fertility and avoid some of the emissions that are associated with that. So the food system, as I'm describing, is this much larger system that has touch points on every aspect of our lives. So again, there's the food system, and agriculture is a subset of that larger system. So I'm going to take you guys through some kind of global context, and then I want to channel down to Hawaii. So one of the things that I am a student of is the process of the industrialization of agriculture globally. Much like any other kind of manufacturing, food has become industrialized. I come from a part of California, the Central Coast of California, where there are 25,000 acre lettuce farms, right? These are industrial modes of production with their very high input intensive, labor intensive, capital intensive systems. And you look around the world, what has happened is through the application of capital, technology, scientific research, we've been able to increase the productivity of agriculture almost anywhere in the world, including in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. And that's what this data is showing, is we've been very successful at increasing aggregate productivity in agriculture for a very long time. And I mention this simply because one of the things that many people are concerned with is feeding the world, right? Many of us are concerned about and are advocates of local agriculture or increasing productivity in agriculture because we want to make sure that people have access to adequate food. But it's important, as I go about this presentation, simply increasing agricultural production or simply increasing agriculture here in Hawaii is not going to make sure that everybody is fed, because we have food now is market mediated, right? Nobody's giving away food. Those of us who can afford good quality food can buy it in the marketplace, but those who don't have adequate disposable income, those are the people who are, by definition, technical definition, those are the households that are food insecure. And we saw evidence of this in the great economic recession where employment plummeted, right? And people's purchasing power diminished. I'll show you some data, and household food insecurity shot up. Same thing during COVID-19, right? It was an economic crisis that led people to get into these food lines because they simply lost their jobs. We didn't stop producing food. So we produce enough food to feed the world's population now. That is not an issue. It's a matter of access or entitlement to a basic income so that people can afford the food that is abundant in the marketplace. And that goes for many of the great famines that have affected the world, the Great Bengali famine and so forth. There was always adequate food, but people could not afford the food that was abundant in the marketplace. So we've been very successful at increasing agricultural production around the world, but it's come at an ecological cost. And this is the area of my research in part, is we've been able to industrialize the agricultural sector, but it requires a significant amount of inputs into agriculture. And so this top map, you see there's a bunch of little white dots. Those are major hypoxic zones. Those are marine ecosystems that have been polluted with nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer. And you see a cluster in the Gulf of Mexico. That's because of the corn belt, where we're producing significant amount of corn and soybeans, mostly animal feed, also biofuels, but the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus fertilizer that goes into that to maintain high levels of productivity, that synthetic chemical fertilizer is subject to leaching. It enters into fresh water and eventually marine ecosystems. Those surplus nutrients cause algal blooms, and then leads to these major hypoxic zones or dead zones that have negative impacts on biodiversity and fisheries. Go ahead.
No data on Russia.
Is there no data on Russia? Well, this is probably 10 years old at this point. I don't know why Russia is not included. Other things that we should be concerned about, including here in Hawaii, is we've industrialized animal agriculture as well. Just like we are farming things as large-scale industrial monocultures. You see here on the right-hand side, a single crop species planted over a large acreage of land, just like in the plantation era here in Hawaii. You have a monoculture of a single crop species, and that's very susceptible to pests and pathogens. And it entrains those systems to dependency, not only on the nutrients that I mentioned can cause some negative ecological impacts, but often pests and pathogens can build up in these systems because there's no biological diversity to keep it in check. And growers are essentially forced to use an arsenal of synthetic chemical inputs to suppress the populations of pests and pathogens to keep them under check and avoid the economic losses that would result from an unchecked pest population. Does that make sense? And so what has happened with the industrialization of agriculture is the biological diversity of cropping systems has diminished, and they become more dependent upon these synthetic chemical inputs. What's that?
There's somebody too.
Who's what?
Oh, you need to add somebody. Okay, got it. One of the things that I'm particularly interested in and concerned with is these large, what are called confined animal feeding operations. And so again, like crop monocultures, we have animal monocultures where you have these breeds of chickens, for example, that are raised in these cages, right? They may be the size of a toaster or a little bit larger. And these broiler hens or egg hens spend their lives in there. And you could imagine, just like during COVID-19, right? You have a pathogen that can be transmitted through an aerosol. If you have a bacterial pathogen or a viral pathogen, it can spread very rapidly through that system. And that's the principal reason why antibiotics are used prophylactically in animal agriculture. Those chickens are fed antibiotics in their feed because it reduces the pest load, avoids, outbreaks of pests, but it also allows them to increase in size very rapidly. And that's the World Health Organization has repeatedly called for the end of the use of antibiotics in animal agriculture on a prophylactic basis because it's driving the development of genetic resistance and bacterial pathogens that we share, think of avian flu, that we can also be affected by. So the World Health Organization has for now decades been saying, guys, we have to end this because it's going to lead to the development of genetic resistance and a pathogen that can spread to the human population. And then we have the next version of COVID-19, but with a bacterial pathogen, right? Antibiotics are used to control bacterial pathogens, not viral pathogens. Does that make sense?
Does that concern include the antibacterial exposure in the environment from their waste?
That's actually one of the things that are being studied as a result of the aerosol of creating antibiotic rich aerosols from these outside confined animal feeding operations. So you think of Texas, these big feedlots, right, where they're consuming a lot of antibiotics and they're stomping around in their manure that gets turned into an aerosol. Surrounding communities are ingesting a significant amount of those antibiotics. So it's both true for these inside confinement systems, but also the outland. And of course, there's human beings, as mentioned, that are in the system. So I bring this up only as context for why we need to be thinking about not only alternative production systems, but how do we take care of all the people that we need to if we're going to claim that we have a more sustainable and equitable food system. So one of the things that's happening with the industrialization of agriculture is people's diets are changing, right? Even the diet of the people in the United States has changed as the industrialization of food production has occurred. And now more and more people are consuming a diet really based on a Western diet. You know, a lot of these industrial inputs that are going into food processing are being made available all over the world. So more and more people are eating high salt, high fat, high sugar diets. And this is leading to what's called a nutritional transition. And you can see profound rates of overweight and obesity and different forms of chronic illness. So approximately 30% of the global population is now overweight or obese, including a significant number of children. And you see these are the OECD nations. Trend in the percentage of the population that's overweight or obese, and it's often because of dietary changes. Okay,
You're not seeing that like India, Africa.
You're also seeing it now in less developed countries. This data is really focused on the industrialized wealthy nations, but you're seeing similar trends in developing nations as well. Yeah, it's true. And a lot of the industrialization of production has led to many of the commodities that go into food processing to be made artificially cheap, because our federal government is literally taking our tax dollars and subsidizing the production of corn, soybeans, and other commodities that make them relatively cheap for the food processing industry or the animal agriculture industry to use as inputs. That keeps their costs down. But at the same time, we're not subsidizing fresh fruits and vegetables. And that's why if you get a flyer from Safeway and you look, the price of a pound of hamburger relative to some fresh fruits and vegetables, fresh fruits and vegetables are probably comparable in the price or higher, right? And you think of the amount of energy and nutrients and time and processing that goes into the production of a pound of animal flesh versus, pears, it's incredible. And that has to do with our keeping those products artificially cheap through a national food policy that subsidizes a certain type of production. And I'll get into that if we have
those
time.
industries haven't been conglomerized like the beef industry.
Which industry?
The fruits and vegetable industry hasn't been. I know
less so.
In California, if you didn't have 500 head of cows, you were out of business because they legislated it such that it was worthless to have what would have been a dairy farm from the 40s or 50s. You have to have at least a minimum of 500 head.
Yeah, and that's true in vegetable crop production, though there's more niche markets for fresh fruits and vegetables.
Or has it all been bought out like by such.
Well, there's,
Realize.
I may have eliminated the slide because I didn't want to get too far afield, but I have colleagues that study consolidation in the food and agricultural sector, and there's incredible amounts of consolidation or concentration of ownership in mostly in the meat packing industry, also increasingly in the beverage industry, right? Even wine and spirits is owned by large multinational corporations. The seed and input industry is highly consolidated. And of course, I think your implications are they have an influence over public policy, right?
Control it, so.
So then you have kind of this,
WHO says don't do it, they're gonna go.
right? There's a certain,
They can't support everything, so I feel like some things they are doing are like the calorie capsules. Where a person could survive, not saying it's good food for them, but like if you're looking at like carbohydrates and meat, right? I mean, it's like, I'm not saying you don't need vegetables and fruit, because you do, but if you're gonna put all your money in buckets, where you're gonna invest, like the substance of what McDonald's has, for example. I mean,
well, I'll continue. We can kind of have some debates about this, but I wanted to kind of dig a little bit into what's called food insecurity or household food insecurity. And this is something that's technically defined and technically measured. So the USDA, their Economic Research Service, studies household food insecurity on an annual basis, and they've been doing it since 1995. Okay, and it's a questionnaire that goes out to households all over the US, including in Hawaii. And they ask a series of questions to determine whether or not a family has adequate access to healthy, affordable food, and whether or not, in extreme examples, people are actually skipping meals so that other people in the household can have enough to eat, right? So there's a series of questions that put households in different categories, you know, that they are food secure, or there's moderate food insecurity, or there's extreme levels of food insecurity in a given household. So they do that here in Hawaii, and we have data on that in Hawaii. And you could imagine that it tracks pretty closely to poverty, right? Because again, food is market mediated, right? And if you don't have a lot of disposable income, you often don't have access to adequate amounts of food. But to my point, you see the great economic recession in that gray bar. You see household food insecurity spiking as a result of the great economic contraction. And that's because, again, food is something that households have to buy. And if they lose their income and the price of commodities go up, there's a spike in oil prices at the same time, you see this contraction in disposable income, and therefore the rate of food insecurity goes up. As the economy has recovered, you see it going down. We get right to the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and then there's a little spike in household food insecurity, again, because there was a contraction in the economy. People lost their jobs. Does that make sense? So this is
spike here.
in the last couple of years, I think because of inflation, then there'd likely be there'd be a little bit of a spike. But you know, when you have a major economic recession like in 2007 and 2008, you see a significant spike. I actually was surprised that COVID-19 did not create a larger spike in household food insecurity, but the data is just really surfacing. Here in Hawaii, the rate of household food insecurity with children, so if you were a household with a child, it went as high as 48% during the peak of COVID-19, because there were so many households that were dependent upon the tourism industry and the schools. We have a lot of low-income households here in Hawaii, and because of the contraction of the tourism industry, people were out of their jobs, kids were not going to school where they often got fed, right? We saw this major spike in household food insecurity. Is that making sense? At the same time, of course, we didn't stop producing food. There was still food available, right? We're still producing food, but people cannot afford the food. So
they were destroying food.
What's that?
They were destroying food.
I don't understand.
Like the milk industry was dumping it,
Oh,
and the potato industry, they were dumping it. Well, they were giving it away. They were farms that were just saying, come in and take whatever you want.
There was
Yeah.
a time like that here.
How do they factor in, because a lot of the cheapest food is also the most calorie dense,
Mm-hmm.
right? So how does that factor in with food insecurity?
Well, it's really, it's less about like the nutritional profile of food. It's more so when you're responding to a questionnaire, have you skipped meals, right? Have you run out of money for food in the last 12 months or 30 days?
So it's self-reported.
It's a self-reported food insecurity instrument. So it'd be very difficult, of course, to gather that kind of data of actual verification. So it's all self-reported data. Again, they've been doing this since 1995. And I just hammer on this because when we frequently talk about the food system of Hawaii, many people talk about the need for food self-sufficiency, right? And that's an interesting idea, but in the context of globalization and industrialization of the food system and high costs of production, because of everything being so expensive here in Hawaii, it's very difficult for local agriculture to compete with much larger industrial modes of production that are happening in California and other parts of the world, right? And so there's certain things that farmers here in Hawaii can produce, fresh fruits and vegetables, highly perishable items, but we don't really produce grains anymore, even though we could produce rice, right? Arkansas produces rice, the Philippines produces rice, Thailand produces rice, and they do it at a massive scale, far more efficiently in conventional market terms than we could ever do that, unless you want to pay $10 a pound for rice, right? We could do it. Physically, we could do it, but most people are not willing to pay for niche market rice. So, yeah, and some people will, and that's, you know, that's a kind of a niche market that many people with some disposable income will do.
That's an educational aspect as well.
So I just want to point out that, you know, this process of the industrialization of the food system and kind of this cheap food policy, flooding often low income communities with relatively cheap, quote unquote, food that high in fat, salt, sugar, that's increasingly showing to have a burden on people's bodies in the form of chronic illness. And that has a monetary cost. That's what this is. This is data from the CDC. So this is looking at what are the healthcare expenditures and what's the value of the amount of time that people are missing, the amount of money that would normally be attributed to their productivity in the workplace. And this is because of chronic illness. So we're talking about literally hundreds of billions of dollars. This is what economists call an externalized cost of production. Our cheap food policy is having an impact on our health and well-being, but it's hidden in the price. Like some of the foods that are sitting on this table, right? We pay a certain amount for that commodity. However, there's hidden costs, social and ecological costs, that are borne by society, that are not represented in the price of that commodity, but perhaps the $11 a pound rice, if it was farmed locally, right, and using ecological practices, it would justify that $11 a pound price, right? But what we do is it's kind of a race to the bottom. Whoever can produce that commodity at the lowest price, they win, right? But again, there's these hidden externalized costs involved in the production of that commodity. Does this make sense? So again, their economists are starting to look at, well, there's actually a significant hidden cost associated with the way that we are producing food today.
Well, and like, when you go back to that slide, when it costs this much for healthcare, and we're looking at the poverty levels, then they're probably on for the government's dollar for their quest medical, right? So they're not actually paying for the medical bills like taxes are.
Yeah. So there's significant hidden costs that are not even represented here. Okay, so again, now just recently, like this came out less than a month ago, the UN Food and Agriculture Organization was doing this assessment, mostly looking at the ecological hidden costs. I talked about eutrophication, right? I talked about unintended exposure to pesticides. So they tried to calculate what are the total costs of these externalized production costs associated with agriculture. We're talking about trillions of dollars. Okay, so even the economic literature is evolving to kind of examine whether or not this system is truly sustainable. And increasingly it's being pointed to as not being ecologically sustainable or socially equitable or even economically viable unless we allow for the continued externalization of cost of reduction, unless we continue to allow the federal. What's that?
That it's not sustainable.
Well, because you can look at, for example, you have
Where do you see it faltering?
the agricultural portion of it, or
System.
well, I would start with the agricultural portion of it, and then we'll move to the social aspect of it. So the agricultural portion of it, in some farming systems, there's such high rates of erosion, right, that literally it's becoming increasingly difficult for farmers to grow and be productive in those farming systems, right? And it's requiring more and more agricultural inputs to maintain the same or even lower yields from that production system. So literally we're undermining the natural resource base upon which agricultural productivity depends. There's
So you're
also
saying the productivity will decrease.
the productivity is decreasing.
Yeah,
And then there's salinization, right? Every time you're applying a synthetic chemical fertilizer, you're leaving a little bit of a salt behind, right? As that material decomposes. And then you could look at other.
or even water.
That's right. And one of the things that we know
The entire Western United States, they make more money by selling their water rights than growing crops.
that may be true. And also one of the things that happened in agricultural production as we've shifted for think 100 years ago, all forms of agriculture were really dependent upon the application of animal manures and even human waste into agricultural systems if you go back far enough, and then crop rotation, cover cropping, all the application of different forms of organic matter that maintained a certain amount of water holding capacity in those soils. And what's happened is we switched to synthetic chemical fertilizer. That does not replenish the organic matter reserve in the soil ecosystem. That biotic community in the soil begins to diminish, becomes poor, pests and pathogens begin to grow, and that soil ecosystem no longer has the same water holding capacity, making it less resilient to severe weather events, whether it's severe rainfall or drought. So even though it may not be immediate, what we're seeing as ecologists is the degradation of soil ecosystems around the world. Right. So that has long-term implications just for the biophysical sustainability of the system. However, those farming systems can be regenerated. And that's the term regenerative agriculture. You can take a highly degraded agricultural ecosystem and change the production practices and really enhance the biological components of the soil and enhance the physical properties of the soil, enhance the water holding capacity, and so on and so forth. There's very, very deep literature at this point on that, and I can show you some slides if we get around to it. So is that, then there's the social aspect of it.
See the decrease, that we become a international one world organization. You don't think demand would drive it from somewhere else, just like Hawaii?
I'm not understanding your question.
Well, he's talking about the loss of production due to the soil erosion or that, but if the economy demands it, it'll be produced somewhere else.
What he's saying is
yeah.
that it physically cannot be if the soil is not restored and.
Right, but I'm saying,
Across the entire world.
Yeah.
is what
But he's right. He's right. And what that's what we don't.
Yeah, be produced in Russia and shipped here.
Well, that's right, and that's why
The market, somebody in corporate is going to find a profit in it, and they're going to do it.
That's right. That's why we do not have a sugarcane industry, right?
Yes.
Because the organized labor and environmental regulations of the United States impose limitations on the ability for sugarcane to be viable, and so it's shipped to other places with lower labor standards and reduced environmental quality standards. So yes, that's true, but as a global society, we need to be thinking about how long we can do that.
Well, you like a lot of.
Yeah, regenerative agriculture has also been shown to reduce input costs and increase profitability for the farmers. So a lot of it is just getting people past their old ways of thinking, which has been using chemical agriculture since, the Green Revolution in the 40s and 50s, and into what's the new science that's taking place, which I actually covered soil food web. I did a presentation.
Oh, great. Yeah. Well, also
So-
I can show you guys some additional stuff. So we'll keep going and we'll open it up for conversation, but this is super fun. So increasingly international scientific bodies around the world are calling for food system transformation, that the food system is fundamentally broken, that it's, despite our increased levels of productivity over the last 60 years, we're not feeding the world's population, and we're degrading agro-ecosystems, and we're generating a significant amount of greenhouse gas emissions through agricultural production. So it's now recognized that the food and agricultural system is the #1 driver of global environmental change and negative public health externalities. It is the key driver, right? 30% plus of greenhouse gas emissions globally come from the food and agricultural sector. And that's from deforestation, that's from soil tillage, that's from the application of synthetic chemical fertilizer, and so forth.
Just seeing if you have anything in the chat.
Okay. So anyhow, there's all these increasing calls from national academies of science and medicine from all over the world, kind of scaling down locally. We see some significant problems in the food system of Hawaii, right? Born in the bodies of the people who are historically marginalized with the imposition of industrial mode of agriculture, right? Here, this is on health inequities in the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community. You see very high rates of chronic illness and significant differences between the state average and the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander community, right? And if you study it, if you go to the Waianae Coast and you look at the food environment in the Waianae Coast, you see that there's actually relatively few comprehensive grocery stores, and you see a lot of fast food and convenience stores, in which, of course, there's a lot of foods that are not really health promoting. Right, so you're seeing some significant health inequities between the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander population, and a lot of this is food. There's other behavioral factors as well, but a lot of this is food. I'll keep going here. Let's see. I don't want to go into too many details about this. This starts to get technical really fast, but since the decline of the plantation form of agriculture here, primarily sugarcane, you've seen a significant decline in the value of agriculture in Hawaii going on 40 plus years. And so that's principally to do with the decline of the sugarcane industry. And for reasons we just mentioned, that's getting outsourced globally to areas where it's more profitable to produce those things. And the thing that has been, anybody know what the highest value crop is in Hawaii? Some of you will probably know this.
Pineapple?
No,
Coffee?
no. Biotechnology corn seed. So Hawaii is one of the central areas where corn seed that's used to produce, it's an industrial use of corn that's animal feed and input into biofuels manufacturing. So the seed for that industry is produced here in Hawaii. They grow it out to make sure that the traits are represented in the transgenic manipulation. Principally, that's herbicide tolerance and whether or not that corn plant, once it's growing, is actually producing its own pesticide, Bacillus thuringiensis toxin. And so those are the key traits that are selected for and then grown out here. And it's important to understand, and we're doing a talk on this, is there's high rates of production here because basically you can grow corn almost year round here, right? So we can grow 3, even 4 crops of corn in a given year. And so in some of these seed corn fields, you have 4 times the application rate of the inputs that go into growing a crop of corn, right? So then when it comes to, say, pesticide use, it can be quite high. And for communities that surround some of these fields, that's why there's been concern raised about exposure, because some of these fields are relatively close proximity to public schools and communities. they're all over. There's a fairly large one on the North Shore, just outside of Haleiwa, about 5,000 acres. And I can show a map. I don't have it in the slide set, but biotechnology.
So it would have to be highly industrialized, because when you're talking about degeneration of the soil and such, growing the same 4 crops.
Yeah, those systems are
year
highly
after
dependent
soil.
upon, they're highly dependent upon inputs. And without those inputs, as soon as you cut off the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium inputs and the irrigation and the pest control agents, then those systems basically collapse, right? But you can prop them up for a long period of time, right? And you can partially keep them productive by increasing the application rate of the nutrients, increase application rate of the fungicides and so forth, intensive tillage. You can keep them productive for a period of time. But yeah, we're degrading the natural resource base upon which productivity depends. It takes a long time, but that's what we're doing. So anyhow, the value of agriculture in Hawaii is, as you know, has been diminishing for some time. And I don't want to go into, rabbit hole here, but one of the key things that's most costly for farmers here in Hawaii is labor costs, right? Many of the crops that are produced here, think of coffee, think of mac nuts, et cetera, they have high labor demands. And so the labor that goes into many of the key commodities that are produced here are quite high. And then of course there's high cost of living that requires paying people a reasonable rate. But overall, according to this publication that was done by UHERO, entity, is that the cost of production relative to California is about 40% higher here in Hawaii. Okay, so that makes Hawaii less competitive if our overall cost of production, if you factor in labor and so forth, it makes it difficult for farmers to be economically viable. So unless you're somebody who's inherited a bunch of land and equipment, your parents were involved in farming and ranching, it's very difficult for young farmers to have a go at it. And of course, the land is highly consolidated in terms of ownership by, previous entities like the Big Five and so forth. So there's not a lot of real estate in terms of ag land in play.
Is there, or what is the percentage of migrant labor? That's how California keeps their costs down.
Yes,
Migrant labor.
Yeah, and that's right, and that's what it's difficult to import labor here, and so you see Thai workers, you see Micronesian workers, and I haven't looked closely at that data, and I don't know how much that is actually even available. I think a lot of that is not clearly understood. You see, in the past, for that very reason, there have been major instances of human trafficking in agricultural labor here in Hawaii, right? For that very reason, to maintain the profitability of some agricultural enterprises. So you may know of some of those lawsuits that happen. Here's just some of the things that we produce and where we produce them. We produce a fair amount of fresh fruits and vegetables and horticultural plants. But I want to continue to get to some of the perhaps more interesting to you folks is because of the closure of the plantation industry in Hawaii, and there has never been a diversified agricultural sector in the post-contact era, right? Once there was contact and the sugarcane industry established itself really in the early to mid 1800s, Hawaii agriculture has really been driven by industrial modes of production. There hasn't been a whole lot of diversified agriculture. And so now with the closing of the plantations, we've never really developed the diversified ag infrastructure. And it's been easier and cost effective to import a majority of our food. And that's been happening for quite some time. So we import an overwhelming majority of our food with the exception of fresh fruits and vegetables and fish. Right. And you can, roughly it's about 50% of those things, fresh fruits and vegetables and fish. We here in Hawaii consume about 50% of based on local production. Essentially, everything else is imported. Right. So we're this geographically isolated population. We have a just-in-time economy. Basically, we're like a household ordering stuff off of Amazon, right? There's not a lot of storage in state. And this has implications for resilience. This is what I'm getting toward. And you guys are quite aware of this as people concerned about environmental quality and perhaps climate change, where we've entered a period of climate destabilization. We don't have an agricultural base, we have a just-in-time economy, and we don't store a whole lot in the state, whether it's at the household level or at the commercial level. We have fairly high to moderate rates of household food insecurity. I'm starting to stack some of these things on top of each other, right, to give you a sense of why I'm concerned about some of these issues. So we see, based on current data, we have about a 9 to 11% on average household rate of food insecurity, right? And it tracks pretty closely to the poverty rate. Higher in the Native Hawaiian community. Basically, we import everything through the Port of Honolulu, and that includes to things going to outer islands. Big vessels come in through the Port of Honolulu, right? And then they're cross-decked to smaller vessels, and then they go out to Kauai and Maui and so forth. Okay, so the big vessels come in here. So if the Port of Honolulu goes down, we are in deep trouble, right? And there is no backup system. Many people think that, oh, well, the military port, they can handle, if there's something goes down at the Port of Honolulu, 1/5 of the capacity. Okay, so the Port of Honolulu is the key structural bottleneck in the system in terms of keeping everybody fed. All of our critical systems infrastructure, think of power, airport, seaport, etc., refineries, all that is on this coastline and all in the same 12-mile stretch, right?
What percent of those consumed by tourism?
What percentage of like the inputs that come in to?
Well, 100% of this isn't going to the local population.
Oh yeah, yeah. So we have about, we'll just say 1.5 million people and 10 million annual visitors. So I don't know that anybody's done that kind of consumption.
15% of that is just for the local, and the other 85 is for tourism.
Approximately, yeah. Back of the envelope, yeah. Yeah.
And most of that is also at or just above sea level.
Well, that's exactly right. All of this stuff, when I say critical systems infrastructure, it's all low-lying coastal in the inundation zone stuff, right? And of course, everything is electrical, right? If the power goes down, we have big problems. And one of the things I often mention, somewhat morosely, is that, you know, COVID-19 was easy, meaning there was no down infrastructure. There was no mass casualties. The roadways were not impaired, right? And you could think, and many people said this, that the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, if Hurricane Lane would have hit us or come within 100 miles, we would have looked like Puerto Rico. There would have been mass casualties. And guess what? You know, as I say here, there's no plan. There isn't a plan.
It's all in you.
Well, I don't know, that's all of me, but that's my work. So I'm just trying to build a case that we need to actually think more systemically about this, because we're starting to see recurring crises, right? COVID-19 was one type of crisis. Lahaina was another type of crisis. And during each of those, and I'm focused on the food system, there's many other things that we should be concerned about in addition to food. But when Lahaina happened, one of the things that we knew going into it, and I'll show you some data, is households are not prepared. Households were not prepared, and this gets to, you know, some of these facts here. I'll show you some data, but we now know that about 12% of households statewide are prepared for a significant natural disaster. That is a 14-day supply of food and water. 12% of the state population has that. Maui was very consistent with that. And what happened is Lahaina hit, people are in crisis down in the actual town, and people were coming from their communities that were unaffected down into the disaster zone because they started to get anxious that they were going to run out of food, interfering with the disaster response system. So this is, you know, people I know on the ground that were tapped by the governor to distribute food during the crisis. They were saying that there was tons of
Kind of
people.
like the COVID panic over toilet paper and all
Yeah.
that crap. It was
Yeah.
there, but people panicked.
That's right. That's right. And so there's a lot of disaster response that can be partially enhanced or mitigated by having people be better prepared. So anyhow, this, this is from my friend David Lopez at HAIMA. He likes to draw these parallels between, that's Puerto Rico, right, on the left and Hawaii on the right. And he was saying, look, Puerto Rico had a large sphere of support. Look at all of the areas of the world that could support Puerto Rico, and we don't have anything remotely to that. And yes, we may be more important in the eyes of some, but you probably shouldn't entirely count on that. So anyhow, context, you guys know this all quite well. COP was it 28? Whatever the fuck it is. I can't even remember at this point. But the president of the COP 28, right, is a climate change denier and said that fossil fuels have nothing to do with it. And so, fingers crossed that something positive is going to come out of COP 28. But if it doesn't, yeah. So anyway, we're entering into this period of climate destabilization, given those factors that I've been talking about, right? Just-in-time economy, low rates of household food storage, high rates of food insecurity, et cetera. So these are the things that keep me up at night. And many people say, well, we should just grow up more of our own food. And I point to that. Yeah, that's a good idea. And we should think about optimizing our local agricultural sector. But our local agricultural sector can be damaged as well due to severe weather, right? This is the North Shore of Kauai in 2018 or 19, right? Being coupled to global commodity chains is a form of functional redundancy, right? And not everybody's going to be happy with eating ulu and kalo all the time, right? There's only a limited number of people who commit themselves to consuming things that we can produce here. And of course, there's the economic viability question that we talked about earlier. I mentioned this before. So this is the inundation zone in a category 3+ hurricane. This is the Port of Honolulu, and all those green dots are major kind of food hubs and electrical hubs that would be potentially affected were there to be, a storm surge from 5 feet up to 20 feet in the red line. Okay, that would disable our ability to import stuff into much of the state. Okay, and that's a category 3 and above. If hurricane lane would have come within 100 miles of the Port of Honolulu, this would have been a likely scenario, 5 to 20 feet of storm surge. So we did this with the NOAA, the agency, just to kind of look at where are we really critical in developing an argument that we should probably start storing some emergency food outside of the inundation zone, y'all, including, guess where the Hawaii Food Bank has much of its food? It's somewhere down here. I don't know. I don't know.
No, I mean, it's like a huge one, right? It's really solid. It's like 200 million.
So this is recent data. We just completed this study. I wanted to know because the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency has a recommendation that all households have a 14-day supply of food, water, and medicine, right? So we just did the first statewide survey to evaluate, well, how many people are actually paying attention to this stuff? Okay, and so this red percentage here is when we ask people, are you prepared for a significant natural disaster? Their response, 71%, said this for water, 71% were prepared for food, and you can see, and then this is the FEMA prepared. That means, do they have a 7-day supply of food? When we actually ask them, please inventory exactly what you have in your house and tell us how much stuff you have, then it dropped to 42. Now it dropped to 19 for the actual 14-day supply of food, water, and medicine. And you can see that there's a significant difference between the actual level of preparedness, 39% for medications and 83% of what they believe they are prepared for. So there's a significant perceptual difference. Does that make sense? And there's also what we learned in this study is, of course, that many people were simply unaware that the HAIMA, the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, is asking us all to store that 14-day supply of food, water, and medicine, because they know we don't store enough emergency food in state. We don't store enough commercial food in state. So you guys are on your own. We're making this recommendation because we're not going to come to help you. That's their policy. Like, we cannot help you, so you need to help yourself. So we wanted to know, well, how prepared are we? Statewide, about 12%, as I mentioned, are prepared across all three. And some of this is really hard because many people cannot store a 14-day supply of their medication, right? Because the policies around certain medication don't allow you to actually store some of that stuff. That in and of itself.
Even your.
If you need things like morphine, diabetes.
That's right. That's right. So that in and of itself could be a significant problem. Where are we at in terms of time? Sorry.
It's 7:05.
Okay.
So I was thinking about closing out, but how much time do we have?
I'll say a few more things. I'll go at a quicker pace. I just wanted to
Yeah.
provide some context. And so now we're kind of,
Yeah,
you know,
we just like to give people opportunity to leave if they have other things to do.
oh yeah, okay.
But-
So feel
That
free
work
to excuse yourself. How are you guys doing?
Okay.
Good. Yeah, just excuse yourself. I'll say a few more things.
Mhm.
So my interest is, of course, sustainable food systems. And if we get food right, we can get so many things right? Because public health, environment, et cetera, is bound up in this. So at an international level, there's been kind of a convergence between the public health and nutrition community and the environmental science community, realizing that the food system is such a profound driver of ecological change and public health change. And this is one called the Eat Lancet Commission. And it's really about how do we grow food and make sure that people have access to quality food to promote health and reduce environmental impact. I think this is a brilliant idea. It's because food is this nexus for so many important things, then we need to be thinking about food system change. Many states on the continent actually have what are called state level food system plans or charters to direct the development of the food system to realize those health, equity, resilience, and sustainability goals. We don't have anything like that. So we looked at all these different existing plans and we analyzed them. So we analyzed all these 25 state and regional municipal food system plans, and we wrote a grant to the USDA, the Regional Food System Partnership Program, and launched this initiative called Transforming Hawaii's Food System Together. And the idea is to begin convening people to talk about what is the future of food and agriculture in Hawaii. Where are we going? Like, there's broken parts of the food system. How are we going to deal with household food insecurity? How are we going to deal with disaster preparedness? How are we going to deal with public health and nutrition? How are we going to deal with Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander health inequities? We don't have a plan. We don't have a plan. And so the idea is, let's start making a plan. Okay, so the idea is like, let's start shaping a common vision to promote these types of outcomes. One of the things we're and I can share this with you, is this idea of a kind of an omnibus approach to public policy making in Hawaii. If we're going to tackle all these problems, we can't just do an kind of a random haphazard way of doing public policy. So we've created this integrated state food policy framework where we're going to release it this winter. And what we've been doing is working with the Aloha Plus Challenge and Hawaii Green Growth team to help them understand the nature of the need for food system change and how that's aligned with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And we're beginning to track, as part of their dashboard, how can we measure our progress through time? And so this is one where we're creating a visually accessible dashboard where we look at, okay, well, this is the national rate of household food insecurity. Where does Hawaii lie by county, right? And so there's these different data sets that we can look to determine whether or not we're moving closer or further away from our goal. So I'll end here. Is part of this Transforming Hawaii's Food System Together initiative is we host an annual food system summit. And so, we'll have the Lieutenant Governor, we're going to have Donovan Dela Cruz, Senator Mike Gabbard, and a bunch of other legislators there to present not only their policy ideas, but we have 170 people in attendance. And we're talking about what are the important pieces of state legislation that may have impact at a structural level on the food system to promote health, equity, resilience, and sustainability. So that's happening on the 14th and 15th of this month. And it's a forum in which we can have a dialogue about prioritizing public policy for changes that are gonna really change the food system of Hawaii. So I think I'll pause there. I've been talking at you for a long time and just give you an opportunity to ask some questions or excuse yourself. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Yeah.
I have some questions, but should we close the meeting first and then I can?
Yeah, we can do the four-way test and then
And
continue
it's,
the conversation.
it's what you said, it's 7 o'clock now?
Oh, it's past.
Yeah.
7:10.
Okay, I should leave about, maybe 7, I don't know, another 5 minutes or so, and then I should probably jet.
Okay, we can skip
yeah.
the four-way test then.
Okay, do you mind if I go first? We're asking like questions, right?
Please.
My first question is, do you have, or what is a good example of places that are doing regenerative agriculture well?
I think, well, Central Coast of California, I think, I mentioned UC Santa Cruz, and they've been very effective in promoting sustainable organic agriculture. They've dedicated a lot of federal money and grant money to hiring extension agents that work directly with organic farmers. And the Center for Agroecology has since 1981 a research agenda to help commercial growers transition from conventional to certified organic. And there are literally 1,000+ acre certified organic farms in the Central Coast of California.
So is certified organic the same as regenerative?
No, regenerative doesn't really have a standard, but certified organic does have a standard. And that's why I often will refer to that, because there's all kinds of terms around sustainable agriculture, but it's really only certified organic that has a legal definition and a set of protocols that are required for certification.
So is certified organic a subset of regenerative agriculture practices?
Farther along.
Yeah, again, there's no technical definition really of regenerative. There's a lot of practices that would generally be referred to as regenerative that would also meet the criteria for certified organic.
Okay, cool. And then the other question is, I'm not familiar with the cheap food policy. What is that policy?
Well, cheap food policy is that the federal government continues to subsidize commodity crop production, right? Literally, farmers receive checks for hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars to continue to produce commodities that we already overproduce. And without those subsidies, they would not be economically viable. And so that creates a kind of a cheap food policy in the United States, where those commodities are kept artificially cheap. They flow into the food processing industry artificially cheap, and therefore we have cheap processed foods entering into all forms of food retail.
Well, I guess my question is, when you say cheap food, you're talking about food inputs, not necessarily the food itself. Is that correct?
Well, the food ends up being artificially cheap, right? You think of the cost of some processed food item.
The lowest price.
Yeah, but is it the food or the inputs that they're making cheap?
Both.
So like, okay.
Yeah, initially the production systems are propped up with subsidies, like literally cash payments, and there's a database through the Environmental Working Group that catalogs the total in hundreds of billions of dollars that goes into supporting commodity crop production, and it keeps those businesses economically viable, but also the outputs cheap.
That's the part I don't know. What's a commodity crop?
Commodity would be rice, wheat, corn, cotton, right? Yeah, soybeans, all those things that literally get farmers get direct payments for growing those commodities.
And then the last question, can we see that map that you had up earlier? I couldn't see it very well.
No,
the one that's like, you said something about white dots.
Oh, at the very,
The orchard.
yeah, the hypoxic zone.
Yeah,
That was long.
I'm sorry. I was on.
This is, you have your scroll thing set exactly opposite the way that I do it. That,
Yes.
Yeah.
I just.
yeah, those are,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Those are all. my questions.
What percentage here on the island that you're dealing with is, they've already gone down this path where they're not growing here, it's all being sent in.
mhm.
So when you're talking about reversing this process, how much of this is fighting large corporations who don't want you to change it?
Well, I think,
Because
I think,
I've never seen, we came from California, they had or Colorado also, they have ABC, always by Colorado, where things that are made
We have
there
ABC.
are labeled there. All right.
Yeah.
I don't see that here in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Where they're protecting their own interests.
yeah, so the way, that's going to be limited, and some of that has to do with the structural factors of, much of the land in Hawaii is based on speculative real estate, right? Rather than the value of agricultural production, and you're always going to make more money putting up condos,
Than you
right?
are
And I think that's what the fight in Maui is really all about, right? And Mahi Pono and these other initiatives are arguably long-term plays that are based on development and not really on agricultural production. That's my own creeping suspicion. So it's very difficult to really, be realistic that Hawaii is going to grow a significant amount of its food. I think we will continue to grow a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables and fish. And one of the mechanisms that we can do to maintain the viability of our local producers and maybe expand it is, and this is the research that we're doing, is we've done studies of the local population, US mainland visitor population, and now we're going to international tourists, principally the Japanese market, and asking the question, what is your willingness to pay for local, organic, fair trade, etc.? Are you willing to pay a price premium for these commodities if they're produced here? And then getting the hotels and the other institutional sellers of food, those 10,
Those because of their land mass.
Mhm.
I mean, they grade the fruit products just like they grade meat. You've got oranges that are grade A, B, and C.
Mhm.
And they take the grade A's and they individually wrap them and sell them for $10 an orange in Japan. So are they used to
Yeah.
paying that? They're used to paying.
So what we want to do is make sure that the industry and industrial purchasers of food, rather than just buying it from Marriott from the mainland, they begin buying an increased proportion of their food from local producers. And ideally, those local producers are meeting ecological criteria in their production practices, right? Certified organic or climate smart, or there's a set of practices that they have to maintain.
Mhm.
And then those increased costs of production of crop rotation and use of cover crops and so on and so forth, the grower is compensated for it, right? Kind of shifting the subsidy system, if you will, but using a market mechanism.
So can Hawaii subsidize the same way the US
Hawaii
subsidized
cannot,
to make it viable?
Hawaii can do some things like tax incentives and so forth, but they cannot do my understanding, direct payments to growers, nor can they do an import tariff like and that's what destroyed the milk industry, because Hawaii did have a protected milk industry, and I think California producers sued the state of Hawaii because they had a import tariff or tax. And so once that happened, of course, all this milk came flowing in, and it was lower cost than Hawaii producers, and then that bottomed out the milk industry, and that's why we had no dairies. Right, because they couldn't survive without that kind of protection.
So is the main prong of your focus education then?
Well, I do
Education.
education at the undergraduate level and graduate education, but then I do research in order to help people like institutional purchasers of food to rationalize their decision making and say, look, you can actually sell higher value commodities produced here in Hawaii using ecological practices, because the Japanese and the mainland tourist visitors want that. And there's 10 million of them, right? That's a lot of money that you could potentially capture.
Come over from China and buy a Hawaiian shirt made in China.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is tinker around the edges, but I think, my high level summary is we want to try to optimize the local agricultural sector, but there's many other things that I tried to touch on in this presentation have nothing nothing to do with local agriculture. It has to do with whether or not people are poor and do they have an entitlement, you know, cash payment to afford food that's in the marketplace, because we're never going to deal with chronic illness, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander health inequities through local agriculture. It's just not going to happen anytime soon, nor will we build resilience and disaster response, you know, between now and the next time that disaster happens through local agriculture. It's just not
They're
possible.
complaining that they're being forced out of their own, the Hawaiians are being forced out economically. But,
Yeah,
but without the education, they're helping it along.
well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people getting forced out, but yeah.
So it seems to me that there's like this discrepancy of, you know, we've got this economy where there's all these people that can't afford food. So, you know, the government is paying the farmers to give them food that's not healthy. And yet on the other side, you've got the organic farmers, the ones who are trying to do the replenishing of the soil and doing what's right for both the environment and the economy. But the price of those commodities that they're producing, the organic food, are way too high for the people who need it. So it's this split of the people who really need to be having access to the organic, you know, fresh foods, still don't have any way of being able to afford or support that.
That's right.
Which is probably why their lifestyle is the way it is, why their diabetes is so high, why their you know, heart disease and everything is so rampant in those populations.
Yeah, and that's why organic is kind of a niche thing, because there is a price premium associated with it, but arguably,
Pushing here,
yeah.
but yet these people still can't afford it.
yeah, and right now, people with,
The, you know, the haves versus the have not.
That's right.
Even more to an extent.
that's right. Yeah, so arguably, we need to begin to change how we fund agriculture at the national level. I'll just show you some research that my colleagues and I did, and this is really based on, well, if we know that organic or,
It's 721.
okay, I'll shut off here after I say this, is we wanted to, I've done most of my research is looking at the biophysical science behind organic and regenerative agriculture, and how do these systems form differently ecologically in terms of nutrient loss, in terms of pest instances, soil erosion, et cetera, et cetera. The literature is quite clear. Organic and similar types of farming systems outperform conventional farming systems across every single environmental performance metric, including until just recently, we're now able to see parity in terms of yield. Okay, so these organic farming systems, I'll just use that as a proxy, seem to show great promise ecologically, right? And of course, there's reduced pesticide exposure and a range of other social benefits. So we did an analysis looking at the big gray bubble on the left-hand side is the total, and this is 2014, I think we were looking at this. Okay, now it's nearly $1 trillion, the USDA budget, right? And we looked at, okay, of that budget, how much goes into farming system research, that's the blue, and then how much goes into these alternative forms of food and agricultural development. And so our assessment was based on an analysis, again, this is 2014 database information, is less than 15% of the USDA research, education, and extension budget goes into anything remotely having to do with regenerative or sustainable agriculture. And primarily it's propping up an old system of corn, soybean, commodity crop production, conventional agriculture, right? So again, going back to the political economy of agriculture, it's supported by a certain set of industry stakeholders who have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. So anyhow, I should go and get my daughter.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
You're very welcome. Yeah, that was fun. We'll have to continue the conversation.
Yeah, it sounds more questions, but
Where did you study at Santa Cruz?
marine biology.
Oh, you did? Okay, cool.
But I recently went through, very familiar with
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so I recently went through that, so.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah,
I used to live on, did you ever hear of Ken Norris? Ken Norris, he was one of the founding faculty members at UC Santa Cruz. He started the Ecological Reserve System, he was a Haitian scholar.
No.
I used to live on, yeah.
Oh, awesome.
And some of his land. It's crazy, UC Santa Cruz, brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. I have some-
Yeah.
It's like getting samples.
Put it on INFAS here.
Bye, everybody.
Hi, thank you so much.
Is there an automatic pay thing?
Oh, get validated.
Yeah, so you can get validated in Moku, it's pretty good.
I think I have to-
Test that, let me do a second ticket.
Okay.
And when you go down to the elevators by the garage,
Okay.
you can put in your ticket and the follow-up ticket. It's like,
I mean, you're parking it.
Okay.
I might tell you nothing,
All right.
I think yourself,
Yeah.
but.
And darn it, people like me.
Just don't open your mouth. You let her do the talking.
Oh my gosh, just go to one of the stores and say.
No, if you just walk up to the host stand at Moku.
So where?
The restaurant right below us,
Oh.
the little host stand right outside, just having that parking validated.